I walked into my own living room and froze. My son was curled on the couch, fever fading, while a man I'd never seen before hummed a lullaby and fed him soup. His little girl sat nearby, shoes falling apart. Watching like this was the most normal thing in the world. For the first time in years, I didn't know if I was witnessing kindness or trespass. He never came home before midnight. The house was built around that fact. Lights timed to soften at 11, kitchen staff rotating the late shift, security used to the silent hours between dusk and dawn. At 7 p.m., the brass key turning in the front door sounded wrong, like a note played on the wrong instrument. Daniel paused in the grand foyer, the echo of his footsteps swallowed by stillness. No shoes neatly aligned by the staircase. No low conversation drifting from the kitchen, no muffled laughter from somewhere deep in the hallways. Just space, and the kind of quiet that made a man aware of his own breathing. He set his briefcase down with more care than it needed, as if the leather were suddenly fragile. Hello. The word went nowhere. His schedule, still pulsing behind his eyes, offered sensible reasons for being here. Exhaustion, a meeting that ended early, a decision to recharge, but he knew better. Something had tugged him home. He could not name it. At first he thought the silence was total, and then he heard it, a thread of sound so faint it might have been imagined. Humming. A melody so simple it felt older than memory. The notes curled into the air from the direction of the living room and disappeared again, as if the house itself had exhaled a lullaby. He reached for the switch to flood the foyer with light, then stopped, letting the dusky evening in through the tall glass panes. In the half-light, the lines of the staircase softened. The polished floor held a dim reflection of his outline. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Another reminder, another number to call back, and he silenced it without looking. The humming continued, steady, unhurried. Daniel moved down the corridor, each step measured, the soft squeak of leather on stone the only answer to his presence. He noticed everything and nothing. The faint warmth in the air, the absence of kitchen clatter, a trace of something savory, stock, maybe, carried on a current from the far room. He felt irritation rise with the questions. Why are the lights off? Where is everyone? Who is in my house? He called again, quieter this time, as if not to startle the sound. Ethan. The name caught at the back of his throat. 5 years old and fighting a fever this week. He should have texted to check in sooner. He should have been here. He should have. The lullaby answered him. The same few notes, patient and sure. Not a device, not a speaker, not the careful playlist the staff liked to set on evenings when he was expected late. A human voice. Close. He reached the archway to the living room and stopped. The room beyond lay in a pool of warm lamplight, edges blurred by the hour. Shadows had gathered in the corners like quiet onlookers. Somewhere inside that glow the humming continued, a small, steadfast sound that steadied the air around it. Daniel felt a prickling heat rise along his collar, the old reflex to command, to demand, tightening across his chest. He took a breath, the kind he used before walking into boardrooms, and let it out slowly. Who's there? The question was low, controlled, the tone of a man who expected answers. The humming stilled. For a second the house held its breath with him. Then, from within the room, a child's soft exhale and the delicate clink of a spoon against a bowl. Daniel's hand tightened on the doorframe. He stepped across the threshold. The lamplight revealed a tableau so unexpected that Daniel stopped mid-step. On the wide sofa, a man he had never seen before sat with a small child curled against him. The stranger's shirt sleeves were rolled, his posture careful, one arm cradling a girl no more than 4 years old. Balanced on his knee was a bowl of steaming soup, and in the crook of his other arm, spoon in hand, he leaned toward a boy. Not just any boy, Ethan. Daniel's chest tightened as he took in the sight of his son. Fever-flushed, but calm, lips parted in the drowsy ease of a child who had just been fed and soothed. The spoon hovered over the bowl, and for a moment Daniel's world split. His own child, vulnerable, being cared for not by staff, not by family, but by a man whose name he did not even know. The stranger's humming cut off instantly when he noticed Daniel. His back straightened, eyes darting wide, the spoon trembling in his grip. He quickly set the bowl aside and rose, shifting the little girl gently onto the cushion beside him. She clutched her tiny patched backpack, watching with wide, unafraid eyes. Daniel's voice came sharp and low, more instinct than choice. Who are you? And what are you doing in my house? The man held his daughter close with one hand and lifted the other in a gesture of defense, his expression caught between apology and fear. Mr. Hayes, I can explain, please. The little girl's voice broke through, barely more than a whisper. Thank you, Mr. Ben. Daddy would have been so proud. Her words carried a strange, disarming innocence. Daniel froze. Mr. Ben? Daddy? His gaze swung between the child and the man. The tension spiked, blood rushing hot into his ears. A stranger, in his house, with his son. Answer me. The demand cracked like a whip. The man swallowed hard. My name's Ben. I'm one of the groundskeepers. His words stumbled over themselves. I usually mow the lawn. That's all. Daniel's jaw clenched. His voice rose, clipped and furious. And today you decided to break into my home, sit on my furniture, and bring a child? Ben's grip on his daughter tightened. He shook his head fiercely. No, sir. I didn't break in. The housekeeper, she let us in. His tone trembled, but there was steel beneath it, the kind born of desperation. Please, just listen. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Daniel stood at the threshold, pulse thundering, torn between calling for security and demanding more answers. In the corner, Ethan stirred but didn't wake, the faint smile still lingering on his lips. That smile, foreign on his son's face in recent days, burned into Daniel's mind like an accusation. For a heartbeat, all Daniel could hear was the uneven rhythm of three people breathing in his living room. He had walked into his own home expecting emptiness, and instead found a scene that felt both threatening and inexplicably human. Daniel took another step into the room, his polished shoes thudding against the rug with deliberate weight. Every line of his posture radiated control, though his pulse hammered so hard he could feel it in his throat. His gaze stayed locked on Ben, who now stood halfway between the sofa and the door, body angled protectively in front of his daughter. You'd better start explaining, Daniel said, his voice edged like glass. Right now. Ben's Adam's apple bobbed. He looked down briefly at the little girl clutching his hand, then back up at Daniel. I came to collect my pay after my shift. The housekeeper let me in. That's all. His tone was rushed, nervous, but not evasive. But then I heard crying. From this room. Daniel's stomach knotted. Crying. He flicked his eyes toward Ethan, asleep against the armrest. From my son. Yes, sir. Ben's words spilled out now, urgent, as though this was his only chance. He was alone. No nanny. No one. He was burning with fever, sobbing so hard he could barely breathe. His own daughter squeezed his fingers tighter, as if she too remembered the sound. I couldn't just walk away. Daniel's teeth pressed together until his jaw ached. He had paid staff, expensive staff, so things like this would never happen. Yet here was a stranger describing what he should have seen himself. So you made yourself at home? Daniel's tone was biting. Fed him? Brought your own child in here, into my house. Ben's shoulders sagged with the weight of it, but he didn't look away. Yes, I stayed. Because he needed someone. His voice softened. I had some soup with me. My late wife's recipe. It always soothed fevers. I thought, his words caught. I thought your boy deserved a little comfort. Daniel stared, the words my late wife's recipe hanging heavy in the air. He wanted to reject them, to accuse Ben of overstepping, but his eyes betrayed him, drifting back to Ethan. The boy's skin looked less flushed now, his small chest rising evenly. His lips curved faintly, as if some of the pain had eased. For the first time in days, Ethan looked at peace. Daniel's throat tightened, though he masked it with a scoff. And I'm supposed to believe this wasn't some stunt? That you didn't see an opportunity and… Ben shook his head sharply, clutching his daughter close. No stunt. No angle. Just a sick boy who needed someone to sit with him. His eyes, tired but unwavering, met Daniel's. If it had been my child alone and crying, I pray someone would have done the same. The words landed harder than Daniel expected, a quiet blow beneath the armor of his anger. He drew in a breath through his nose, long and sharp, and exhaled slowly. The room, once so empty, now felt unbearably full, with questions, with accusations, with a truth he wasn't ready to face. He sank his hands into his pockets, grounding himself in the gesture, while his eyes stayed on Ben. You've crossed a line, he muttered, but the heat behind the words had cooled, replaced with something closer to doubt. Daniel's gaze shifted unwillingly from Ben to the sofa. where Ethan lay curled beneath a folded blanket. The lamplight caught the damp strands of hair across his forehead, darkened with sweat. His cheeks, flushed earlier in the week, were now a healthier shade, the fever's grip loosened. And there, impossibly, was a trace of a smile, a softness Daniel hadn't seen in days. The sight landed like a stone in his chest. His boy was at peace, and it hadn't been because of him. His eyes tracked lower, to the small bowl still resting on the coffee table. Steam rose faintly from its surface, carrying a fragrance both earthy and gentle, the kind that felt like home even to a man who had long since forgotten the taste of such simplicity. Daniel's breath hitched as he studied the details he usually ignored. The worn sofa cushion pressed beneath Ethan's small body. The way his hand, open and relaxed, rested near the edge of the blanket. And just beside him, a spoon wiped carefully clean, set down with deliberate care, as though the stranger had wanted to leave no trace of impropriety. He forced his gaze back to Ben, determined to keep the upper hand, but his attention betrayed him again, this time to the little girl at Ben's side. She sat quietly, legs dangling above the rug, her patched backpack hugged against her chest like a shield. The straps were frayed, the zipper pull replaced by a loop of string. Her sneakers, Daniel noticed them last, were at least 2 sizes too small, the rubber edges cracked, the fabric worn thin at the toes. Yet her face held no bitterness. She watched her father with open trust, eyes bright not from what she had, but from the security of who she had. The contrast was unbearable. Daniel thought of Ethan's overflowing toy room upstairs, the closet lined with shoes that still carried tags, the shelves stacked with untouched board games. His son had everything money could buy. Yet here, beside him, was a little girl who had almost nothing but radiated gratitude simply because her father had shown kindness to another child. He felt a fissure open inside, sharp and unexpected. He had chased acquisitions, quarterly goals, empire after empire, believing they were measures of success. But standing in his own living room, surrounded by luxury, he saw what wealth couldn't purchase: the quiet resilience in a child's smile, the peace of his son cradled in care that cost nothing, and the unshakable devotion of a father who gave even when he had little left. The weight of it pressed against Daniel's ribs until his next breath trembled. He sank slowly into the armchair opposite the sofa, leather creaking under his frame. His hands, restless, smoothed across his knees before stilling. He studied Ethan's softened features once more, then looked across at Ben with eyes that no longer blazed but searched. His voice, when it came, was stripped of authority. It carried only bewilderment. "Why?" Daniel asked quietly, the single word raw. "Why care so much for a child who isn't yours?" Ben didn't answer right away. His hand rested on his daughter's small shoulder, steadying her as much as himself. His chest rose with a slow breath, and when his eyes lifted to Daniel's, they carried something more than nerves. They carried history. "I cared because someone once did the same for me," Ben said, voice low but firm. "When my wife was dying, I couldn't be everywhere. I was trying to work, to keep food on the table, to hold our world together. And in that chaos, there were hours, whole nights, when she was alone in that hospital bed." His throat tightened, the words dragging through him, but he pressed on. "One of those nights, a stranger sat with her. Just sat, held her hand, told her she wasn't forgotten, even when I couldn't be there. They asked nothing in return. No name left behind, no favor owed. Just kindness." Ben's eyes flicked briefly to Ethan, then back again. "That act, it kept me alive. Because when she slipped away, I knew she hadn't slipped away alone. I swore then that if I ever had the chance, I'd pass it on." The living room fell into silence again, but this time it wasn't heavy with suspicion or anger. It was full, brimming with the weight of something Daniel had never made room for, a story that refused to be bought or calculated. Daniel leaned back in his chair, the leather groaning faintly beneath his shifting weight. His fingers pressed together, knuckles whitening. The edges of his world, deals, contracts, metrics, suddenly felt paper-thin. He stared at Ben as though seeing him for the first time, not a trespasser, not a staff hand out of place, but a man who had endured loss and chosen compassion instead of bitterness. Ethan stirred softly in his sleep, murmuring something Daniel couldn't make out. The boy's face relaxed again, as if comfort lingered in the air long after the lullaby stopped. Daniel's voice, when it returned, was quieter than he intended. "You did this because of a promise to yourself?" Ben nodded once, simply. His daughter leaned against his leg, her small fingers curling into the fabric of his trousers. "Because kindness doesn't ask for payment, Mr. Hayes. It only asks to keep moving." Daniel's breath left him uneven, the words striking deeper than he cared to admit. For the first time that night, he had no retort, no armor of authority, no clipped command ready to reassert control. Only the hollow recognition that, in chasing everything, he had forgotten the one thing that mattered. Daniel's eyes dropped to his hands. Perfectly manicured, steady in boardrooms, capable of signing away millions with the flick of a pen, yet now they trembled faintly against his knees. He curled them into fists, as if he could hide the weakness from the stranger across the room. But the truth was impossible to bury. He had failed. Not in the markets, not in quarterly earnings, not in the skyscrapers that bore his company's name, but here, in the quiet space of fatherhood. His gaze drifted to Ethan again, the boy's chest rising in calm rhythm, his small lips curved in that gentle, fleeting smile. Daniel tried to remember the last time his son had looked at him like that. Peaceful, trusting, content. He couldn't. Meetings and dinners blurred together, but Ethan's laughter, his moments of need, his calls for attention, they were fragments Daniel had pushed aside, confident that wealth and staff could fill the gaps. And now, his boy had found comfort not in the arms of his father, but in the care of a man who owned nothing but carried everything that mattered. Heat crawled up Daniel's neck. Shame. It was a word he rarely let himself feel, but it clung now, heavy and relentless. He thought of the nannies with their polished resumes, the chefs with their gourmet menus, the layers of staff he had convinced himself were enough. All of them paid generously, and yet when Ethan needed someone, when fever made him cry in the stillness, not one of them had been there. Not even his father. Daniel leaned forward, elbows pressing into his thighs, and dropped his face into his palms. For a long moment, he stayed there, his breath ragged in the silence. The image of his son's untouched toy shelves, the designer shoes lined neatly in the closet upstairs, pressed hard against the memory of Ben's daughter with her patched backpack and cracked sneakers. Two children, worlds apart in material wealth, yet only one of them had been cared for when it mattered. His chest ached with a pressure he hadn't known since boyhood. The drive that had carried him to success, the hunger for more, always more, felt suddenly hollow. Money built towers, yes. It filled bank accounts and earned headlines. But it had not built a bridge between him and his son. It had not soothed a fever. It had not sung a lullaby in the dark. Daniel lowered his hands slowly and looked across at Ben. The man sat still, steady, his daughter curled against him, eyes heavy with the weight of the evening. He wasn't asking for thanks. He wasn't asking for anything. He had simply given, and in giving, revealed everything Daniel had forgotten. The billionaire swallowed hard, his voice breaking as it escaped him, no longer sharp, no longer commanding. All this time, he whispered, mostly to himself, "I thought I was providing, but I wasn't there." The words hung in the air, fragile and undeniable. For the first time in years, Daniel Hayes, the man who always had an answer, found none. Only the searing realization that in chasing billions, he had let the simplest currency of all slip through his fingers. Humanity. The dawn light slid through the tall windows in muted gold, brushing against the marble floors of the foyer. Daniel stood there, briefcase in hand, staring not at contracts or schedules, but at his reflection in the glass. The man who looked back seemed older than yesterday, though not from exhaustion. It was something deeper, an awakening that unsettled and steadied him all at once. The events of the night before replayed in fragments. Ethan's small smile, the smell of soup, the threadbare shoes on Ben's daughter's feet, the quiet weight of Ben's voice as he spoke of promises born in grief. Each memory carried its own blade, cutting through Daniel's certainty about the life he had built. When Ethan's footsteps padded into the room, Daniel turned. His son's fever had broken. His cheeks were pale but no longer flushed, and his eyes, those clear, curious eyes, sparkled with energy Daniel hadn't seen in days. Without hesitation, Ethan ran forward, arms wide. Daniel dropped to one knee, catching him. pulling him in with an embrace that shook him to his core. The boy's laughter bubbled against his shoulder, unburdened and bright. For the first time, Daniel allowed himself not to think about meetings missed or deals delayed. He thought only of this moment, the warmth of his son's arms, the fleeting gift of trust renewed. Ben stood a few steps behind, his daughter's hand folded into his. He seemed unsure, as though expecting dismissal now that the crisis had passed. His posture was careful, his head slightly bowed, waiting for the inevitable return of boundaries. But Daniel didn't retreat into old reflexes. He rose, keeping Ethan balanced on his hip, and met Ben's eyes with a steadiness he hadn't offered the night before. "I was wrong," Daniel said quietly, so his son would hear too. "I thought money solved everything. It doesn't. You reminded me of that." Ben blinked, startled, shifting his weight as if uncertain how to respond. His daughter looked up at him, then at Daniel, sensing something larger than the words themselves. Daniel adjusted Ethan, his voice growing firmer. "From today, I want you to do more than mow lawns. You're going to lead something new. A program, funded by my company, that helps single parents. Meals, childcare, medical support, whatever it takes." He drew a slow breath. "We'll call it Hayes Family Foundation." The words settled in the air with a weight that felt different from the usual declarations he made in boardrooms. This wasn't an announcement for investors or press releases. It was a promise, made face to face, born of humility. Ben's mouth opened, then closed. Gratitude flickered across his features, muted by disbelief. He tightened his grip on his daughter's hand, as though anchoring himself in the moment. "Mr. Hayes, Daniel," he interrupted gently. Just Daniel. For a beat, the house held only the sound of morning. The faint whistle of wind through the chimney, the creak of wood beneath small feet as Ethan shifted in his arms. And in that silence, Daniel felt something he hadn't in years. Not victory, not power, but meaning. As Ethan leaned back, laughing softly, Daniel whispered into his son's hair, a vow more personal than any contract. "Money builds empires, but kindness builds families." And for once, the man who had everything realized he had been empty, until a single father with nothing showed him what truly mattered.